Hello and welcome to episode 75 of Driver Suit Blog Radio. As always, I'm your host, David G. Firestone. Today I'm mentioning that I'm going to be taking my annual July break where I don't do anything for YouTube or social media for a month. I'm on vacation from work, so I need time to relax and decompress. Now, I said that instead of the stupid game show format I did last year, I'm going to be doing some storytime videos, and by the time you hear this, those videos will already have been completed and uploaded, so I'm going to start with some racing news, just a few stories because I have a much more fascinating story for the final segment. Let's get started. So our first story is that NASCAR has been working on changes to their 2024 schedule. According to Sports Business Journal and J-Ski, link in the description, NASCAR is considering a return to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in 2024 for the Xfinity Series, and there's also a possible Cup race on the table. I think I like the idea of NASCAR in Canada. You could do there's a decent amount of tracks. You could do a hell of a lot worse than Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. I think a Cup Series outside the U.S., not just an exhibition race like those Japanese races in the 90s, but a points-paying race would be a step in the right direction. Because even a lot of people who don't actively follow NASCAR, they're aware that it exists. Now, with our second and third stories, I missed these because I had other things I was working on. But I have to discuss these for reasons that will become clear. Now, both concern penalties of the Coca-Cola 600. Now, the first is that on lap 186 of the race, Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott were racing each other, and coming off turn 4, Hamlin slid up the track and hit Elliott, who in turn intentionally hit Denny Hamlin, which caused a wreck, which took both cars really out of contention. Hamlin was justifiably furious and said, and I quote, "He shouldn't be racing because that was a tantrum." Well, NASCAR agreed with this and suspended Chase Elliott for one race, and he was replaced by Corey LaJoie, who in turn was replaced by Carson Hocevar. I think that's how you pronounce it. My apologies if I mispronounced it. Now, Hendrick has appealed the suspension. Good luck there. And they're stating that they're attempting to get a waiver so that Chase can get into the playoffs. Now, first and foremost, NASCAR did the right thing and should be as consistent as they are these days. I like the consistency. Second, a playoff waiver is a luxury that Chase Elliott should not get. Okay? He's in this situation through no fault of anyone else. He made his mistakes, and now he's paying for them. Okay? If you're going to do a risky sport like snowboarding, well, if you're going to get injured, well, you're on your own, buddy. If you're going to intentionally hit a car and take him out of the race, and then you get suspended, no, you don't get a playoff waiver. And I'm sorry, but you got to take... Some people in life are a mess because of themselves, and I think with Chase Elliott's current season, he has nobody to blame but himself. NASCAR has been very iffy about penalties over the years, with some more valuable drivers and teams getting maybe not the short end of the stick. I love the consistency. I love the enforcement. Now it's clear that if you intentionally wreck someone, you will get a suspension. I think you should lose playoff eligibility to a certain extent. I think losing playoff points, absolutely. And if you get more than one suspension, you're not eligible for the playoffs. We got to start setting some rules here. I think Chase Elliott should be forced to work his way into the playoffs, not be given a free pass. And I think a lot of other fans are happy that the consistency is coming in terms of violations. And in that regard, let's talk about this next and last story for this segment. Uh, According to J-Ski, link in the description, there was an illegal part discovered on the number 14 after the Coca-Cola 600. Specifically, NASCAR announced that Chase Briscoe's team has been penalized for a counterfeit underwing part. According to Elton Sawyer of NASCAR, said the penalty was the result of a counterfeit NACA duct to the engine panel, which is a single source part. Stewart Haas Racing's Greg Zipadelli says we had a quality control lapse, and a part that should have never been on a car going to the racetrack ended up on the number 14 car at Charlotte. We accept NASCAR's decision and will not appeal. Even if it was an accident, which I have no reason to believe, does anyone else really need to think about why this was a bad idea? Why would, if you know that there are inspections and there's going to be heavy fines and penalties, why would you ever acquire, let alone use, a part that you know for a fact is illegal? They claim it was accidental. Okay, why did you have the part in the first place? You knew it was counterfeit. What did you think they're not going to notice? And again, you had the part. Where did you get it? Where did you get it? That's the $1 million question. They had an illegal part. Did they make them? Did they make it themselves? Did they get it from an outside source? I mean, you clearly didn't go to AutoZone to have this thing made. Where did you get it? And since nobody seems to answer that question, which is kind of important to what I'm saying here, I don't think the penalty was harsh enough. You made, Stewart Haas Racing, or at the very least, one of their employees purchased or made a counterfeit part that they knew good and goddamn well was counterfeit. Then, somebody in the organization attached it to the car. Now, whether or not it was intentional or accidental is completely irrelevant, because you had a counterfeit part. There shouldn't be any question here. That's not accidental. I could understand if you had a part that was damaged, but from a visual perspective, you didn't realize it was that bad, so you put it on. This one, you had to have known. You've had to have known. And I like the fact that NASCAR needs to be more consistent, but these penalties need to be higher. These penalties need to be harsher. NASCAR needs to start sending messages to their teams and drivers that attempting to cheat in any capacity will not be taken lightly, and you will be harshly penalized. I mean, and again, even if they quote-unquote accidentally installed the part, it doesn't exactly take away from the fact that they had it in the first place. Okay, so I was originally going to discuss the LIV golf tournament for the second segment. I'm going to push that back to at least next week, because I'm still waiting on a few things to come together about the deal or be discussed about the deal. But I'm going to talk about the death of a comedian and a book that I read about it. I'll be right back. Welcome back. I was going to talk about the golf merger for this segment, but I'm pushing that back till at the very least next week, because there are still many details surrounding this that are still coming out. I'm going to be discussing that a I'm going to be discussing something that plays into what I talked about last week in terms of reading. And I have to set this up. So I didn't know until just before recording that legendary comedian Pat Cooper died at age 93. Now, for those of you who don't know, Cooper was a bold, unapologetic, and hilarious comedian who is considered to be one of, if not the first, outrage comedians. I mean, aside from Frank Sinatra, he's worked with a lot of uh, well-known Hollywood elites like Robert De Niro, and Analyze This is one perfect example. And he had a very long and very successful career. But like a lot of comedians, Cooper had a very tumultuous home life. He was married 3 times, all 2 of which ended in divorce. I think his third wife passed away in 2005, I believe. And he had 3 children, all of whom he had publicly feuded with prior to his death, be it on the radio or wherever. Now, his first wife left. He left his first wife and was never in his 2 children's life when they were growing up. Well, this brought his oldest son to write an autobiography entitled Dear Pat Cooper. Now, as I said last week, I don't read fiction because I don't want to. I'm not going to waste my time looking for symbolism. I have better things to do with my life. But I stumbled across a copy of Dear Pat Cooper a few years ago, read it from cover to cover, and was just disgusted by what I had read. I went to the barbecue grill in my backyard and I lit the book on fire. I didn't want anyone else. I didn't want this book to put anyone else through what it had put me through. And when it comes to Cooper's son, after having dealt with my own mental illness and the mental illness and addiction in my family and friends, I see exactly what kind of issue this son has. He might not want to acknowledge it, but he's the kind of person who has determined the exact set of circumstances where everything went wrong in his life. Using these circumstances, he's built himself a nice little crutch. I'm going to quote Christopher Titus from Norman Rockwell's Bleeding because he sums it up better than I ever could. Quote, "And I want you to know something. We feel bad that when you were in Troop 182 and the Scoutmaster rubbed your butt at the overnight jamboree. But what are you, like 30 now? You've got your life on backwards. Come here, let me flip it. There, see? Now your past is behind you. What say you climb down off the cross, use the wood to build a bridge, and get over it?" End quote. And you know what? I agree. I've dealt with a lot of these guys over my life, and I can say without sarcasm or hyperbole is that the kinds of guys who have these mindsets rarely get better because they have no incentive to. They have the crutch that was made with the circumstances, and they'll never give up that crutch because it's a form of denial. There's a great way to be in denial of your problems. If they accept the fact that there's faults that need to be addressed, they'll never do it because, again, if they accept that they have faults, they accept they have to deal with them. And from the book, it's clear that Cooper's son does just that, putting all the blame on his father for his issues. There are times in that book he gives the impression that he blames his father for everything. From every dead-end job he's ever had, to being sad and miserable, even if he spills his orange juice or burns his toast in the morning. But what's also clear is he chooses to carry this anger with him. And believe me, I was that guy for a while. I see a lot of myself in Cooper's son, but I made the choice to change a long time ago. You carry this anger because you choose to. You choose to be as angry as you are. You choose to let it get to you. Nobody else makes that choice for you. You chose to do it yourself. Okay? And I made the choice a long time ago that not everyone is meant to be in your life long term. And if somebody else's mere presence in your life is toxic, kick them out. Kick them out. Move on and leave them by themselves. I don't care if it's someone you love. I don't care if you've been friends your whole life. I don't care how important they are to you. If the mere thought of them brings you to a rage, they just aren't worth it. I mean, yeah, it'll hurt. Yeah, you'll feel awful at times, but they're consuming you because you're letting them. Okay? You let them consume you. And he's on multiple occasions lashed out at the people who have the gall to tell him the truth because he sees himself as blameless. Pat Cooper was the problem, and if you tell him otherwise, you're the jerk, even if you're trying to do it for the right reasons. And again, I've dealt with my real mental illness. I've dealt with stuff in my family and my friend groups. I see exactly what's going on here. I see what the real dynamic here is. I see the real cause of the issues, and I see that there is never going to be any chance of healing. You can call me a jerk for telling the truth all you want, but the truth often doesn't change to protect your feelings. Some people are able to accept it, some people aren't. Dear Pat Cooper is proof that the sun can't. Now I'm going to take my final break, and then we will discuss the CM Punk's impending return to AEW. I'll be right back. So for the final segment, I will discuss the impending return of CM Punk to AEW tomorrow night. Specifically tomorrow night on TNT, the first AEW Collision will be broadcast live from the United Center in Chicago. Now, as part of this new show, CM Punk will be returning in a match with FTR versus Jay White, Juice Robinson, and Samoa Joe. Given everything that's happened since October, AEW and CM Punk working with each other now seems like a very odd move given all the issues. So what I'm about to discuss is a summation of the... This was on TV Tropes, their Troubled Production page, link in the description. Now, this is one of the best summations of all the shit that went down between Punk and AEW, as well as some other issues. I did have to edit it for spelling and to add some information that wasn't present. Now, this is going to take a bit, probably going to be the longest segment I've ever done on the podcast up to this point, but it's worth it. So the conflict began when wrestling journalist, and I use that term very generously, Dave Meltzer, started saying that CM Punk was the cause of Colt Cabana being demoted off AEW TV and placed in the newly purchased Ring of Honor. Now, the backstory on this is Colt Cabana and CM Punk at one point were the best of friends. They had a major falling out between because of a lot of personal issues, and there was a lawsuit between them and WWE. It's really too lengthy to go in here, but let's just say that they were best friends and now they hate each other. Now, AEW owner Tony Khan, keep that name in the back of your mind, Khan stated that Punk had nothing to do with Cabana being taken off AEW and moved to Ring of Honor. Regardless, this didn't stop Hangman Adam Page delivering a promo against Punk for their match heading into Double or Nothing 2022. Hangman goes off script and made the subtle accusation that Punk got Cabana demoted, much to Punk's noticeable confusion. Obviously, Punk was not happy about this, and while it was stated that AEW tried to have Punk and Hangman resolve their issues, Punk was not satisfied with how the talks went and how he felt Hangman wasn't sorry. And remember, this is the same Hangman Adam Page who, in public, said, "I don't take advice from veterans, so take that with what you will. So the Dynamite after Double or Nothing, the newly crowned champion CM Punk injured his foot after he dove into the crowd and hit his foot on a metal rail, which is why WWE switched to padded walls a long time ago. As a result, AEW would eventually crown Jon Moxley, former Dean Ambrose, the interim champion during that time. Now, Punk would ultimately return in August to start a feud with Moxley over unifying their championship belts. During the build-up, Punk in one of his promos actually made an off-scripted comment where he called out Page, going as far as saying, "The apology must be as loud and as public as the disrespect." As this is going on, Meltzer continues to claim Punk got Cabana demoted and that he's being difficult in the locker room. Now, when it comes to this accusation, it needs to be noted that multiple wrestlers such as Wardlow, FTR, Jade Cargill, and Ricky Starks, among others, have spoken positive of Punk backstage and Punk helping them out. Now enter a new set of players, the Elite, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega. Around this same time, they start making comments themselves after the shows are over that come off as a subtle take that towards Punk. Now, Hangman and Cabana are friends with the Elite. This will be important later. So, 2 weeks before All Out, Punk and Moxley have a match on AEW Dynamite where Punk shockingly loses to Moxley in 3 minutes due to Punk re-injuring his foot at the beginning of the match. Now, this detail will be very important later. The following week, Punk decides to have a rematch against Moxley after All Out, thanks to public encouragement from his friend mentor Ace Steel. On the night of the pay-per-view, CM Punk wins the rematch, wins the AEW Championship, and finds out he's going to be challenging MJF, who won a Battle Royal earlier in the evening. That will be important later, too. So, something that AEW does, and I don't know who they're trying to fool with this, is that after every pay-per-view they have what they call a post-media scrum, a post-show media scrum. And Punk was, during his segment, which the link to the YouTube is in the description, Punk comes in and immediately talks to a journalist he thought was friends with Cabana, but apparently wasn't. However, this did not stop the subject of Colt Cabana, and then it kickstarted the now infamous media scrub meltdown. Now, I want you to immediately pause this podcast, go and watch the media scrum. Go watch the CM Punk media scrum, because I promise you I cannot do it justice here. So Punk started his rant on Cabana, and he accused a lot of the wrestling quote-unquote journalists there, who are more often than not they're AEW friendly media. Wrestling journalism is a subject that I can't cover here. But it didn't just stop there. Punk proceeds to accuse the Elite and the wrestling journalist of going to wrestling journalists and how the Elite, quote, couldn't manage a fucking target. The Elite are also famously friends with Dave Meltzer. The Young Bucks affectionately refer to him as Uncle Dave, and they even named one of their finishing moves after him. And it's also very well established that they're a well-known source for Meltzer. Punk discussed Hangman Page as a, quote, empty-headed fucking dumb fuck who went into business for himself, and that, quote, he jeopardized the first $1 million house that this company has drawn off my CM Punk's back. MJF, who had returned from his own issues, which we'll be discussing later, discussed MJF, saying that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, the grass is green where you water it. And Max would rather shit where he eats rather than water the grass, which I think is a great quote. Then it happened. He made the now infamous and legendary comment, if you have a fucking problem with me, take it up with me. Well, once his turn at the scrum was over, the Bucks and Omega took him up on that offer. Now, details are scarce as to what completely happened because there's so many different versions of what happened. But after Punk left the scrum, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, along with Omega, the company's lawyer, confronted Punk in his locker room, and a big fight broke out between the Elite against Punk and Ace Steel. One version of events that I've seen stated that Punk got the upper hand during the fight and Ace Steel actually bit on Omega's arm. Now, keep in mind, CM Punk is a former MMA. CM Punk was in the UFC. He's MMA. He knows his way around a fight. The Young Bucks and Omega have probably never been in a real fight in their life. Now, the following Wednesday on AEW Dynamite, because of the fight and controversy, Tony Khan suspended Punk, Steel, the Elite, and a number of other bystanders in the fight. He stripped Punk of the AEW Championship and the Elite of the Trios Championships. Also, during the debacle, it turned out that Punk had messed up his leg and would be out of action for a while. Now, this is where things kind of do get comical. Punk, because of the Punk fight, Khan proceeded to launch a quote-unquote investigation into the fight. Now, from what everyone who doesn't have an agenda has seen of this, it's little more than a sham specifically designed to find Punk's side in the wrong and the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega in the clear, as in addition to wrestlers and sources for news, they're also executive vice presidents in AEW. So Ace Steel was fired in October, and the Elite would be reinstated back in November after having their suspension lifted. There were also quite a few plans that had to be drastically altered as a direct result of the injury and the fight. Now, Meltzer, who was more or less fanning the flames here, said himself during this time that Punk would not be welcome back in the locker room, and Chris Jericho was said to be adamant about making sure Punk would not return. During this time, they had Chris Jericho, when he was Ring of Honor champion, work a match with Colt Cabana on Dynamite, which came off as a particular take that to CM Punk. The Elite themselves also took noticeable jabs at Punk when they returned and had a match in Punk's hometown, and they were doing such things as mocking Punk's botched buckshot lariat from the attempt at Double or Nothing and using the go to sleep, his finishing move. Not long thereafter, it became clear that Punk had been shown to be interested in returning. I don't know why. And there were a number of talks about Punk coming back to AEW, at one point even sorting things out with the Elite. Punk was noticeably sharing an Instagram post or two that hinted at him towards returning. So on March 22nd, Meltzer was on his message board. He claimed that CM Punk refused to lose to Moxley before All Out and got his lawyer involved. This led to Punk posting and then quickly deleting a story on his Instagram where he stated such things that got his lawyer involved was because he wasn't medically cleared at the time when AEW wanted him to do the match, and that Moxley was pitching a Rocky 3 storyline for them where Moxley would beat Punk and then they would do a rematch. Punk stated that Mox refused to lose to Punk unless they did that storyline. Punk thought it was a bad idea. He also then stated he's never seen a Rocky movie. I don't know how you manage that. I have no idea how you manage not to see a Rocky movie in this day and age. But he went through with it because he got medically cleared and the boss wanted him to. Now, there are rumors that should be noted here that there was heat between Moxley and Punk, though Punk actually spoke positively of Moxley at the scrum. Other rumors stated that Moxley's biggest issue was that he did not like being seen as just an interim champion and wanted his title legitimized. Punk also called out Meltzer for his lies and called Jericho a liar and a stooge. Well, if the shoe fits, Chris. Jericho is also another source for Meltzer, And many have even speculated it was him and not the Elite that was feeding this information. You could go either way with that one. Meltzer later apologized and admitted that he knew Punk was not being medically cleared at the time of the suggested match was in fact the reason that Punk had gotten his lawyer involved. At the very least, Dave admitted to withholding information regarding that matter. Dave does not back down from a... If Dave Meltzer has an opinion on something, he rarely backs down. A few days after that, Moxley would go on his wife Renee's podcast. He would go on his wife Renee Paquette's podcast, try saying that 3 times fast, and he stated that he wasn't even under contract for the summer of his interim title run and that he could have easily shown up to SummerSlam if he wanted to. Moxley felt he was bending over backwards for the company, and he never denied the claims of refusing to lose to Punk unless they did his idea. So as a result of this negotiation, AEW is now going to be running a soft draft split in June with some talent staying on Dynamite on Wednesday night, like the Elite, while others, like CM Punk, are expected to headline AEW Collision. Now, this seems to be a way to keep the hostile parties separate until they work things out. Excuse me for a second. Sorry. For those of you who are not familiar with what a draft split is, WWE has been doing this for a few years now. You have one group of champions and wrestlers on WWE Monday Night Raw, and then you have another set of champions on WWE SmackDown. And this is done because you have to watch if you want to see your favorite wrestlers, and sometimes they can be moved around. It sounds stupid, but it works. So, with that all out of the way, I don't see this working out well for Punk at all. The question is, why is CM Punk so insistent on returning given all the issues in question? That's the million-dollar question. From my perspective, he wants to wrestle, but other than that, he has little, if any, reason to return to AEW. Well, why is this? When the top officials in the company were all against you and really didn't want you there, even though you were making money for them, he has no reason to trust them. None. If 3 guys who I had called, who were top officials in the company, and they burst out into my locker room and started a fight, you know what? I wouldn't go back there. Especially because they're higher up than me. But I think also CM Punk has a problem with understanding his rank at times. I mean, look at what happened in WWE. Look at what happened with it. Just look at what happened here. I mean, the rating boosts and fan attention it will bring probably won't even be worth it, given from what I've seen in terms of ticket sales. And I'm not even sure this is a good move. Again, I don't see this working out well for Punk. He's 44 years old. He's had a slew of injuries. The people who screwed him are still there and still in positions of power. So what's the upside for Punk? Well, this might be his last one in wrestling. And he's running in a company that's known for being a shit show with a lot of serious botches, issues, and injuries and backstage bullshit. The axe is going to fall on Punk sooner rather than later. Then the question is not when. The question is not if, but when. Punk wants to do business, but sometimes you just really need to cut your losses. Never mind the fact that at least one report that I've seen indicated that there are measures in place to keep talent from walking out if CM Punk returns. So just take a second and think about that. CM Punk, I'm sorry, but some runs in wrestling just aren't worth it. So, with all of that, what's the current situation with the AEW Championship, I hear you asking? Well, they would crown a new interim championship, and then MJF would go on to win it, and as of this writing, is the current champion. And again, Punk is going to be returning tomorrow. But again, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Chris Jericho, they have ill will towards him. And they've been exonerated, and the real victim took all the official blame. But let's talk about MJF, because his part in this whole thing cannot be ignored either, because he got fucked over too. So in May of 2022, MJF had a match set with Wardlow leading into the Double or Nothing pay-per-view, but the weekend of the show, he was scheduled for a fan event he no-showed. It would later come out that MJF was having real frustrations with Tony Khan about his contract, his payment, and the fact that Tony was said to have been mad at him for doing an unapproved interview with Ariel Helwani, who, if you don't know, is a sports journalist primarily covering MMA and other combat sports, but he's also very buddy-buddy with WWE. Exasperating issues was the infamous interview that Khan did with Ariel Helwani, where Khan pretty much refused to answer any questions and just made himself look really bad. Ariel Helwani has even stated that it's the worst interview he's ever done because Tony wouldn't answer any questions. Go and watch it. I've seen politicians on the stand pleading the fifth who gave more information than Tony Khan did. So on the night of the whole media scrum debacle, MJF made his return. Obviously, they're going to go MJF Punk for the AEW Championship, because why wouldn't you? You need to have the two best workers in the company go for the championship, and this is a perfect babyface heel dynamic. But I think also Punk's injuries are going to catch up with him if the politics don't catch up with him. I think it's a terrible move for him to come back. Whatever they're paying him isn't worth it, really. I think sometimes you just got to cut your losses and accept that your career's over. I mean, even guys like Charles Barkley and Karl Malone who wanted to at least win one championship in their careers. Even they had to admit when it was over. And I think there's going to be issues because there can't be. There's going to be issues because there's no way there can't be. And I'll be interested to see how this shit show plays out, because it's AEW, it's going to be a shit show, but I cannot wait to see how this goes awry. And with that, 75th episode of Driver Suit Blog Radio is officially over. I will be discussing what happens on AEW Collision next week, as well as some more racing news, and I'll be hopefully talking about the LIV golf thing. But until then, I'm Dave Farsley. If you like, comment, share, and subscribe, I will see you next week.